Now, for the first time, if you go to Malaysian television, at least before I came here, I saw, for the first time, Commonwealth games in Glasgow. There one chair was like jumping around, promoting. Last time we haven't seen that. So my question is this: is this something good? So now, I close this first session to say, is the Commonwealth still relevant? It's about me. If I make it relevant, it becomes relevant. If I don't make it relevant, it's not relevant.
Thank you. We've had a diversity of views, and I think it's only fair, given that we don't have too much time, to invite views from the audience. There have been a number of issues that have been identified as being very relevant to our discussion. And I would say that in Professor Selva's speech, you could have a gamut of issues that feature frequently in discussions within the Commonwealth itself. And of course, we've also had perspectives from Malaysia, which are very welcome. So I was just wondering, perhaps we can expand on some of those ideas or throw up some new ideas which would be apposite in the context of our discussion of whether the Commonwealth is still relevant. Clearly, there are a number of controversies, a number of issues that are debatable and are being debated, apart from what has just happened, for example, in relation to the Sri Lanka shogun, which in turn, of course, also to a large extent brought into focus the issue of human rights, and that was exacerbated to some extent by the departure from the Commonwealth of Gambia, though it was not specifically on that particular issue, but it was still very relevant. Human rights is a sticky point. The issue of values has also been brought up, and that became quite important in the context of the charter, the Commonwealth Charter, which was recently put in place, which in turn was the result of an exercise called the Eminent Persons Group. So there are quite a few of those kind of issues which are worth talking about. Then there's of course the running debate on what would be the future of the headship of the Commonwealth after Queen Elizabeth II. Equally importantly, the issue of the effectiveness of the Commonwealth Secretariat has been put in question, and peripherally, that debate also involves talk about who's going to be the next Secretary General. What kind of Secretary General should we have when the term of the present incumbent comes to an end quite soon? And overarching all this is the issue of resources. The fact that the Commonwealth Secretariat, the Commonwealth generally, has been very poorly funded, and should not governments be asked to fork out more than they have done in recent years? Because if you're going to give the Commonwealth a list of issues to contend with, then you also have to provide the means to deliver on that list. So there are quite a few such matters which are worth discussing. So I'll stop here and simply invite views from the floor.
Stephen Leong from University Tunku Abdul Rahman. I'm glad to be attending this roundtable, this panel discussion here. It has been said that the question whether Commonwealth is relevant or not shows that, in fact, it was relevant at one time. And how relevant it is depends on the members, the organizations, no doubt about that. Touching on Commonwealth values, the list of them, democracy, rule of law, and so on, human rights, while we may disagree on definitions, pure definitions of democracy, governance, and so on, nevertheless, I think generally we would agree that they are still relevant. But from my perspective, given the fact that the vast majority of members are developing countries, nation building, and so on, so somehow the perspective that wealth is not so common among the Commonwealth members. And this is where, for relevancy, I think this will go on and on, the organization will need to continue to focus on poverty, eradication, alleviation, and so on. And I'm sure the experts will be able to provide, say, proposals, how they can move in this direction. Because it's clearly the question of food security, the question of human security in the vast range of countries that are in the developing status. Okay? Secondly, when we look at, say, issues, we need global issues to link ourselves to for relevancy. Climate change, global warming. I'm sure Commonwealth has been thinking about this. I recall back in '89 mentioned about Chogam meeting, Langkawi, the Langkawi Declaration came forth, okay? And Malaysia also played a very big role in the Rio meeting. Commonwealth can also continue in this direction, show that it is very concerned also. Then, right now, we have this problem of MH17 crash. We know Britain has been outspoken, Australia has been outspoken on this, and Malaysia too for that matter. And there are Commonwealth countries whose nationals have lost their lives in this catastrophe. Perhaps Commonwealth could also come on board and put pressure on the parties concerned for openness. Yeah? So much Amin for the time being.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We may have occasion to comment on those matters from this side of the table. Any other questions? Any other issues? Yes, I'll take you and then I'll take Tan Sri.
Thank you. Peter Hurd from Somewhere University. Most of the discussion that took place, apart from a little bit at the end, focused very much on the kind of political and technocratical aspect of the Commonwealth. I just wanted to pose the question from a slightly different perspective, and that is the various peoples from the country. As an Englishman, as a sportsman, I've actually participated in the Commonwealth Games, and I've been to other sporting events. And I can tell you that the atmosphere is completely different. The first time I ever really met people from a different country was going and participating in some games. And I took so much away from that and learned so much. And I just wonder whether we might hear some thoughts from the panel on the value of things like the Commonwealth Games and some of the other really kind of people-to-people aspects that are really important. And perhaps underlying all of that is the question not so much is the Commonwealth relevant, because it's up to us to make something relevant if it's needed. So the question for me really is something like the Commonwealth still really needed today?
Thank you.
Panelists bring back old memories. Many of us have been, on Commonwealth meeting. Now, I'd like to emphasize the point that the Commonwealth was very relevant way back. I remember, we all recall Tunku Abdul Rahman's role within the context of the Commonwealth and knocking off apartheid. And we have always taken an active part in trade, economics, investment. But times have changed. We don't have that cleavage to the Commonwealth, that old sentimentality. In fact, there has been now, I think, gradually a reaction against the Commonwealth, because this has become an old school association or a social club. If you look at it from the cost-benefit point of view, we spend so much money, send delegations for all these meetings, regional conferences, as well as the once in 2 years, the bigger Commonwealth conference. But what do we take back with us? So I'm seriously suggesting to this panel, and you may be able to initiate some movement within the Commonwealth, to seriously ask whether it's relevant, ask for a panel to be set up. I think there was some consideration some time ago on this, but bring it up again. And let's not be emotional about it. Let's not be sentimental about it. Let's look at it in terms of hard dollars and cents, because we can still cooperate among friends. There's no need to have an institution for it. And therefore, not stop the Commonwealth, not break it up, but have a plan to phase out of it. And maybe pick up some ideas where we might be able to collaborate on an institutional basis, but otherwise forget the Commonwealth. I sound a bit harsh, but I'm basing it on my own experience and listening to this wonderful panel here. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody on the panel wants to start on that rather pessimistic note?
Yeah,
Yes.
see, when I started talking about the relevancy of Commonwealth a few minutes ago, I said, when you talk about Commonwealth, the perception is that you're talking about the executive part of the Commonwealth. Chogam, you know. Professor was talking about just now about Seri. Now, I remember those days when I was a young state assemblyman in Sabah. I attended conference like that. In every conference, we are looking forward to the speech of Seri. Now, Professor was talking about leadership of Commonwealth at that time. The Prime Minister of Australia, the Prime Minister of those Prime Ministers in the African countries like Julius Nyerere and whatnot. Those were the personalities. They worked together. That was the League of Mother. That was a different world altogether. Different challenges. Now, as time went by, each of those countries developed. Some, of course, went down the road. Some went up. Some practice democracy, it is now. Some halfway. Now, when you talk about whether the Commonwealth is relevant or not, you're talking about the executive. Now, what we need now, I think, is leadership again. Now, Commonwealth have a secretariat in England, in London. Magolo, you mentioned that. We need personality like Seri. But when you choose leadership from Commonwealth countries, also it will be determined by other countries. So now, each country, the way I see it, first, before they make any decision, they will think first of the benefit of their nation, not the Commonwealth at large. Because at that time, Malaysia also was just a developing country. So when Malaysia now start talking about its foreign policy, it will think about China, for instance. In China, that's not practice democracy. So when England now start talking about its survival in economy, it will look at Europe. At one time it was EEC, now it's European economy. European Union. European Union, they have ministers, they have representatives from England to hold ministerial posts. So the focus shifted. Now, we must look, I think, Commonwealth in two perspectives. One is macro, one is micro. When I talk about macro means, you look at it, it's a big picture. Is Commonwealth still relevant? It's a big picture of associations of independent 54 nations. Of course it is. Because if you think it's not relevant, why some other blocks now trying to emulate Commonwealth by forming blocks also? Either it is a trade block or whatever, political block. Now, if we have weaknesses, I think we have already identified that. That's the reason why Commonwealth formed an eminent group of persons to identify what are actually the weaknesses of Commonwealth. Now, they have identified 106 weaknesses. 106 weaknesses of the Commonwealth now. They have made recommendations. But there are only two recommendations now that the Commonwealth picked up. That is, going back the core values of Commonwealth. Those days, the core values was the advancement of democracy only. Because some other Commonwealth nations don't even know how to conduct elections. You see, those days, the subject matter of human rights are not hardly touched, hardly defined. So now there is a new challenge. Like I said, I started there just now when I talk about human rights. When you start about human rights now, you only define about personal rights. But Mahathir all the time argue, why don't we also define human rights that all those poor people are entitled to roof over their head? That was right. Some other in one country will be talking about children who are working in factories underage. But Mahathir argument in that time was that, why don't you ask in the first place how these people become poor? Because there was no help. Don't they have any rights? Of course they have rights. So now we have already identified the weaknesses of Commonwealth. That is, this is a new world, new challenges. So therefore, Commonwealth must adapt to the new challenges, new world, new policies. Now let me talk micro. That is as far as CPA is concerned. I mentioned just now earlier that I said within this Commonwealth framework, there are hundreds or more than 100 associations. In Malaysia, here, very active is Magistrate and Judges Association, working within the Commonwealth. This association work together with some of the Commonwealth countries pertaining to legal matters. Now, when you talk about Commonwealth, we are talking about Parliament, we are talking about democracy. So CPA is in there. Now, not many of you know that now CPA also got a secretariat that is also in London, in Millbank. Now, in 2008-2011, the chairman of the CPA executive that governs the CPA of 140 parliament and state assemblies in the world are from Malaysia, Datuk Safi Abdal. And he only had 3 years to administer CPA. And until now, parliaments all over the world are talking about our achievement of what we did. But it wasn't publicized. Now, Malaysia will be hosting CSPOC, that is the Association of Speakers of all over the Commonwealth, in 2016. I will be the host. And I just attended CSPOC's meeting in New Zealand. And when New Zealand decided to host that, the Speaker of New Zealand Parliament presented a paper to Parliament. And the justification was this. And I said, this is the opportunity for New Zealand to showcase whatever that we have in New Zealand. And he said also, in conjunction with